Disrupting Japan, Episode 7. Welcome to Disrupting Japan, straight talk from Japan's most successful entrepreneurs. I'm Tim Romero, and thanks for joining me. Today we sit down with a couple of glasses of wine and have a talk with Taku Harada of Peatix. It's an honest and heartfelt discussion about how he ended up being an entrepreneur because, frankly, he had no other choices. We talk about the importance of a support network, not so much in business, but in your personal life. Now, for those of you who don't know, Taku is the founder of Peatix. It's a rapidly growing event ticketing and promotions platform that is expanding very rapidly, not only here in Japan, but in Singapore and in America, particularly on the East Coast. Now, Taku is really an amazing guy. He's someone that had a career that most people would kill for, and he sat down and looked at his future, which was pretty much guaranteed, and was terrified by it. So this is a guy who walked away from a very comfortable, executive, fast-track existence into the maw of grossly underfunded entrepreneurship, and he's doing great. He's got a lot to teach all of us, quite frankly. So rather than have me continue the introduction, let's get right to the interview. I'm sitting here with Taku Harada of Peatix. Cheers.
Cheers.
The event ticketing platform, which, every time I try to describe somebody else's company, I get it horribly wrong. So
I think you got it right, though.
Why don't you explain what it is?
Peatix is we're an event management platform, mobile ticketing platform, and we started out in May of 2011 out of Tokyo. We now have 3 offices, the biggest one being Tokyo, obviously, but also in Singapore and New York City. So we're about 30 plus people right now.
Do you have a specific market focus? Because, that's there's a lot of players in that space. Eventbrite in the U.S.,
Absolutely.
A lot of local companies here, Doorkeeper, Meetup's another one, right?
Yeah, there used to be more.
That's
when we
good for
first
you,
started out, I think back then, in 2011, Japan alone, I think there were about 15 of them.
Wow.
Similar companies, including some big ones like Recruit, and Yahoo would later come into the game. And worldwide, I think there are about 60 or 70 similar players.
What are you guys doing? You must be doing something right if you're one of the fewer and fewer men standing. So what do you do that's different?
That's a good but tough question. I wish I knew. I'd like to say...
That's a great answer, actually. No, I respect that tremendously.
I think a couple of things. One, from the get-go, we built a good UI, a UX. We were always very careful about that. But also, we weren't like most of the other startups in our competitors. I think a lot of them would just build a product and with that, if you build it, they will come type of attitude.
It does strike me as one of those products that seems simple when you first think about it.
Yeah, but it's actually very difficult in terms of marketing and customer acquisition. There is no clear marketing channel. It's not like you can spend $1 million on Google or Facebook ads and just assume that you'll be reaching out to many, many event organizers, these are very hard to identify, especially online.
So did you target a particular niche, or are you still trying to go wide? Are you targeting like music events or industry trade shows?
Yeah, the interesting thing is when we first started, I come from a music industry background, actually. I started at Sony Music, was head of music at Amazon, and I launched iTunes in Japan. So we always thought that, we had the music segment in mind. We thought that indie music artists would flock to our site and start using us right away, just like that. But it didn't really happen. Oh. And remember, this is 2011, right after the earthquake. Getting together and having fun was just not really encouraged at the time.
Oh, so this was still in Japan?
Yeah, this is still in Japan when we first started. So we had a good team of, we call them evangelists.
Right.
We made an effort to go out into communities and attend events and build relationships.
So a lot of one-on-one doing things that don't scale.
No, it's hard. It's hard, man, in the beginning. it takes time. And I think Eventbrite will tell you the same thing. It just takes time. There's no clear marketing channel. There's no winning formula there. You just have to build relationships and start there.
I see you guys everywhere in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in Singapore a few months ago, you guys were all over.
Mm-hmm.
You guys are doing great in the States as well.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a different go-to-market strategy for each market, or do you just kind of figure it out and pivot as you go forward in each market?
We try out different things. To tell the truth, Singapore is amazing. We started doing well very early on.
They love you there. They really, I've heard nothing but good things.
We're in New York City, and the U.S. is a little tougher. But in the end, we try out different things, but it just comes down to the same thing. It's about networking and building relationships, and building that trust, and going into these communities, building relationships, so that when it's time for somebody to hold an event, Peatix is the first platform that comes to mind.
Now, when you're talking about building trust, are you talking about building it on a very personal level between the organizers and your representatives, or
Absolutely.
Is it building it as a brand?
I think as we start to scale, the approach becomes a little different, but in the early days, it's really building those one-to-one.
It's really personal. That's interesting.
It's really personal. And what happens, though, if you get an event that, let's say, has 100 attendees, there's always a number of people within those 100 who will hold an event in the future. So if you provide a good ticketing experience through Peatix to the attendees, chances are that when it's time for them to hold an event, they'll use us. So that initially, in terms of numbers, 90% of the events using Peatix were these events that were acquired by our people, by our team. But eventually, that organic acquisition channel starts to grow if you do it well. So I can, today I can say that over 70% of all events on Peatix in Japan come organically, without us really going out and meeting these people.
That's fantastic. Now, I noticed one thing that you guys have that does seem quite unique was your color sync technology.
Yes.
And that's, again, why don't you explain it so I don't butcher it, but it's fascinating.
Thank you. Color sync is a new technology that helps you to, if you're the event organizer, it helps you to check in all the attendees very securely and quickly. We came up with this idea through a painful experience that we had in the past with a big event. It was about 30,000 people. It was a music festival in Osaka. And we had to securely check in 30,000 people within like an hour.
Wow.
Or so. And at the time, still today we use the QR codes as your ticket. So we had all these scanner boxes out at the gate, and the sunlight is getting in the way and this or that, and it's just very painful. It's a harrowing experience when you had 5 guys maybe, but you have to scan these things very quickly.
Well, 5 guys trying to check in 30,000 doesn't sound like the math is working in your favor.
And then when we saw that, and then our guys are starting to talk about, okay, we need to produce more of these scanner boxes. Why don't we outsource this to some manufacturer in Taiwan or China, and we could sell those scanner boxes through e-commerce and etc. So I said, guys, stop. That's crazy. It's not going to scale. So we need to come up with a secure, quick, accurate way to check in people at the door that doesn't really rely on additional hardware. It needs to rely on something that people already have, and that obviously is the mobile device. So color sync is, let's say you're the organizer at the door, you've got your iPhone in front of you, it's flashing colors, red, blue, green, yellow, in certain intervals, in certain patterns. An attendee with the right ticket, the correct ticket, will be holding up his or her ticket, and it'll be flashing in the same colors.
So the guest's mobile device and the organizer's mobile device will flash colors in the same sequence together.
Yeah, and that sequence is updated. One pattern will be very different 10 seconds later, so you can't really replicate it. That color sequence is randomly updated.
And you can check in a whole group of people that way too, right?
And the way it works is we've been doing a lot of experimentation. Is that you ask, let's say you got 100 people lined up, for the first 20, you tell them, hey, show us your phones, and if all 20 are fine, you just let them in. But if there's one guy who has a different sequence, you sort of accost them and say, hey, what's up? Let me see your ticket. So it's very quick. It's like, boom, 20 people. All right, next 20 people, boom. So it's just amazingly fast.
So it's more than 10 times as fast as trying to scan someone with codes.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
It's still in closed beta, but we're going to gradually release it out into the real world, and hopefully by next year it'll be the default ticketing format for all Peatix events.
That's cool.
It's because it's just so simple.
I know. Simple. When I saw that, it was one of those technologies that is, what's the word? Sort of duh.
Yeah.
It's like, no, and I mean that in the best possible way.
Yeah,
when you see it, it's like, well, yeah, that's the obvious solution that no one ever thought of before.
Yeah, it is.
So I love it.
It's sort of like a proposal. This is the way it should be, and we're gonna, fine tune everything. We're working out all the kinks right now, and it'll be ready pretty soon, next year probably.
Cool. I look forward to that one. You once said that you don't consider Peatix to be a Japanese company. What mistakes do you see Japanese companies making? What were the mistakes they were making you didn't want to make at Peatix?
Well, we come from Amazon, the co-founders and I. I joined Amazon, was it 2001? This is like when they first came into Japan. Yeah. It was very much an American company operating in Japan, meaning it's all English, many nationalities, a lot of Americans, obviously. I just like that atmosphere, and I think as a team, any strategic direction, we all of us understood directly because we would converse in English. Jeff Bezos is saying this. It didn't need to go through an interpreter. Now, I've been at another company, literally where top Japanese management, and this is when Tim Cook came for. This is at Apple. Tim Cook. For some strategy discussions. Literally, I walk into the meeting room, and each and every top manager on the Japanese side has his personal interpreter.
His own interpreter?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
This is absolutely crazy. These people are not understanding what Tim is saying. I mean, they're losing a lot of it along the way. I saw it firsthand.
And they're all getting slightly different takes on it anyway, aren't they?
Yeah. And so we sort of liked the way Amazon had started out, and then at the same time, you know this, Rakuten, our biggest competitor at the time, and still is, they had aspirations to get outside of Japan, but they were really struggling as a company culture.
Yes.
Because it was very Japanese.
Well, they've also gone all English all the time now, right?
Yeah, and people ridicule that, but I don't no intent to ridicule that, but it seemed a little funny at the time to most people. But we just saw how painful it is to try to become an international company after you're so big in Japan.
So you wanted to start out on the right foot.
Right. From day one, we wanted to build a fundamental culture that is very multicultural and multinational so that we wouldn't suffer. We were big dreamers, but in 5 years and 10 years, when we become big, it's not much of an issue at that point.
You wouldn't have to try to retrofit it into your culture.
We wouldn't have to have these.
Well, listen, you worked for a number of pretty large technology companies: Amazon, Apple, Sony. Did you always know you wanted to start your own thing, or was there some trigger that inspired you that said
very specifically?
Okay.
Well,
what was it?
No. I had no idea I would be doing anything like this. We were at a good career trajectory very early on. I think I was a senior manager at Amazon when I was 29 or something, leading a team of 20, 25 people. And at that point, we could sort of see beyond the horizon what was going to happen to us 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line. Okay, I'm going to probably become a VP at a foreign subsidiary, and it'd be like, I don't want to say easy, but it'll be very comfortable.
Not challenging, or you'd be bored, or what?
I mean, you move from. We know many people like that. Move as the head of this company from this subsidiary to this subsidiary. I could see that happening, and that was sort of horrifying to us to see, to see exactly what we're going to be like in 10 years or 15 years. In our youth, being able to predict everything was just horrifying. I remember, and this is, and my co-founders and I think we were in a Starbucks on the first floor of the Amazon office, and we just started to talk about that. Hey, we know exactly what's going to happen in 10 years. What do you think? And that's when we first started to get together and talk about things. How do we want to live our lives going forward? Isn't it?
So a group of you just decided you didn't like the path you were on.
I mean, it was great. Don't get me wrong. We loved Amazon. Absolutely. That was my business school. That was my MBA. That experience was wonderful. And to this day, we carry everything we learned there. But you only live once, I guess, and we needed a new challenge. We didn't even know what to do. I think I have on Evernote or something, we have a list of ideas, and they're also like stupid ideas. But we knew we just wanted to jump ship, and realization that
it just wasn't what you wanted to do.
Yeah, what are we doing this for? We need to build and operate a platform of our own.
Yeah. When you made the big leap from Amazon, and I mean, let's face it, the career path you were on is not a bad one.
No, not at all.
So when you made that leap, did your wife, did your friends, did your family, were they supportive? Were they surprised?
Supportive in the beginning.
Okay.
Sure, do it. My father is a musician. He's a violinist.
All right.
So he independence and being able to make your own decisions.
A little bit of a bohemian.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he was a little proud of seeing his son take that step. But then, the ensuing years, the struggle, money and hours.
The actual reality of
the reality of
entrepreneurship.
it, I think nobody realized it's going to be that hard. I didn't know either.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think if most people actually understood how hard it would be, no one would ever go down this road.
No, I don't recommend it to anybody.
I would have.
When somebody asks me, "Hey, should I start my own thing?" It's like, well, probably not. Is my first reaction. Is my first answer. It's damn hard. You probably going to shave off several years from your life expectancy. But in the end, if you still need to do it, then you should. But if it's like, I don't know, then don't.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point. There's a lot of... being a startup founder has become quite fashionable these days in Japan. And it didn't used to be that way at all. What advice do you have if someone...
What would I say?
What do you say to the Japanese who want to start something now? What are the mistakes you see a lot of young Japanese making when they're wanting to start a company?
Well, the biggest one is they think it's easy. They think it's going to, you somehow, all right, lean startups, the cost of starting a company, sure, it's a lot lower than, compared to when we first started. But they think it's going to be a cakewalk, and it's really
so
not.
They've read the Lean Startup, they've seen the Social Network, they think they know what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to understand that relationships will be broken along the way. You might get divorced. I mean, it's awful. It's probably going to be. I mean, I'm sure maybe 1 out of a million it's a cakewalk, but usually it's not, right? For 99% of startups, I would say very specifically, either you've saved a lot of money, or you have friends, relatives, family that you can rely on through the hard times. Let's face it,
you'll need that support.
You do
structure,
whether it be taking care of the kids once in a while because you can't go home, or money, right? You need to borrow money from your relatives and just plead on your knees. We all did that, and unless you have that hotline right there when you need it, I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah. You guys moved to the U.S., and now you yourself have roots there, But there is a growing trend of Japanese startups moving to mostly San Francisco, but some to New York. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's a good thing? What kind of companies do you think can benefit from moving there, and which ones do you think should just stay in Japan for the moment?
I can only speak about our experience. For us, it was definitely the right thing to do. We were a Japanese corporation in the beginning, and along the way, after we launched Peatix, and when it was time to raise funds from both the U.S., we went through what's called a triangular merger and built a parent U.S. entity on top of. We did that because we wanted investors from both the U.S. and Japan, number one. At the time, at least, no U.S. VC would invest in the Japanese KK.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
This is 2011. Maybe it happens a bit recently, but back then, definitely not. And we knew that we wanted international talent in the U.S., Singapore, around the globe. So for those two reasons specifically, we did that. I think you need to do it for the right reasons.
What are the right reasons?
For us, it was those two things right in the beginning, investors and talent. But I also know of several startups from Japan who set up a Delaware entity, but they were not able to attract any U.S. investors at all. But they were a Delaware corporation, so you sort of cut out the Japanese VCs, certain Japanese VCs as well, so they're like stuck in the middle.
So are Japanese VCs still reluctant to invest?
Without any validation from a good U.S. investor, I think it's extremely difficult for them to jump on.
Okay.
Without it.
So they'll be part of a round investing in a U.S. corp, but they won't lead it.
And so in that case, I think it actually hurt them. I've seen that with a number of startups, and I thought it's dreadful. It's absolutely terrible. So I think what you need to do is really take a good hard look at yourself and ask yourself, am I going to be able to attract a good VC or investor from Silicon Valley or the US and Japan? And what is the right way to do it? Validation.
So the validation either from people in the industry or existing customer base.
Yeah, I mean, if you have revenues, you're.
Well, that's the ultimate validation.
Right, that's the ultimate, right?
Yeah.
But if you're pre-revenue, then you need some sort of guarantee or tangible validation, I think.
You spend a lot of time going back and forth between the U.S. and Japan. Mm-hmm. What do you think that people outside Japan misunderstand most about Japanese startups?
The world is really becoming the same, and especially so right now with the platforms and smartphones becoming universal. People seem to dwell on the differences. Okay, there might be some differences in the way people pay for things, for example, or how physical goods are delivered. But as long as you take care of those, the rest, I feel like it's more or less the same. And I don't, as a startup entrepreneur, I really don't want to dwell on or really focus on the differences from region to region.
Do you think that the people in the startup community in America you interact with have an accurate perception of the startup community in Japan?
They don't know, I guess, would be.
Well, we're hopefully
they don't
trying
come
to fix
here
that.
Enough. They don't come here enough.
Okay.
They make a lot of wrong hiring decisions, for example. I've seen that happen. They build a certain big auction company in the U.S. when they came in. I just feel like they built the wrong team.
Famously, yes.
Right, that one. But if you're able to identify the right team, I feel like...
When you're talking to people in America, what do they think about the Japanese startup ecosystem, or do they think anything at all about it? And vice versa.
Yeah, it seems to me the general perception for an American startup is that Japan is a very cool place, a cool market that you absolutely want to be in sometime in the future, but they don't know how. They always dwell on the differences. It must be so different from the U.S. Right.
So they still, ironically, in this age of internet and instantaneous communication, Japan is still viewed as some kind of exotic market. Galapagos.
But I think that's the general perception. I've been preaching that. No, it's probably what works in the U.S. should theoretically work in
This is something I've said as well. I think I think 90% of what works in the U.S. will work in Japan, and vice versa. But I think what we're up against is there are a number of people who've made a whole little industry of telling people, no, Japan is completely different.
Exactly.
You need to go through me. I'll explain this strange, weird culture to you.
We know names, too, right? People who do that.
We won't mention any.
I think you really need to focus on the universal. Jeff Bezos, my demigod, right? He always said, there's nobody on planet Earth who would ever say, oh, geez, I wish my product would be delivered later than sooner. I wish, this product was more expensive. I wish Amazon had fewer products. Like those, you need to identify the universal truths. If you have a good perception of what those are, theoretically, it should work anywhere in the world, right?
I think that's really interesting. So it's kind of that the value proposition is universal.
It should be, right?
Maybe you have to tweak the positioning and marketing a bit. Communication aspect.
And that's all it is, I think.
And has that been your experience at Peatix, bringing it into all these different markets?
I think we're still in pursuit. We don't know all the answers, but we're always asking ourselves. Like at least for me, I always tell my teams in Singapore or in New York or in Tokyo, please don't dwell on the differences. Please don't come to me about this is why Singapore is different. I don't care really about the differences. We're still, as a young startup, we should be pursuing the universal truths that is common among all event organizers and attendees across the globe, and we still haven't figured those out yet. We'd rather focus on those than the local differences.
And if someone figures out a value add in Singapore, it probably adds just as much value in New York.
Like Reid Hoffman's, what was his golden rule? You need to build things that will impact 10% or more of your customer base. If it's 0.2, it's not worth it. And when people start dwelling on local differences and ask for resources on those things, might be used by a couple of customers in a particular market, but nowhere else. It's a waste, really.
Yeah,
and
it's distracting.
It's distracting. What is a startup? A startup is a company with limited resources. Limited resources mean time, money, and people. So rather than spending time on local differences, I think you really need to really focus on core truths, and that's my philosophy, at least. I hope it's the right philosophy to have.
Well, it makes sense. It really does.
Yeah. So
and
Amazon,
it's also, it also has a side effect, I think, of getting people focused on the positives, where differences aren't. They're not necessarily negative, but they probably sort of tend that way, right?
Yeah.
So over the last 5 or 6 years, the startup community, the startup ecosystem in Japan has really, it's transformed. You can barely recognize it.
Yeah.
Some good, some bad, but
some stupid. Yeah.
Some stupid, some overpriced.
Yeah.
But what do you see as the most positive trends right now?
You mentioned that it's become a little fashionable. Maybe it's a good thing that people are starting to realize, okay, how do I don't want to, work for the same company for 50 years, like my forefathers. It's okay to take that jump, perhaps.
So it's becoming more socially acceptable?
That it's, and people have been preaching that Japan never accepts a failure, and we need to change that. And they've been doing it for 4 or 5 years. That, okay, maybe it's changing as well. That maybe small failures are acceptable relative to a decade ago, perhaps.
Well, I think so. I see that as well. Small steps.
Yeah.
But I think, like you mentioned, especially among younger generation, people in their 20s will view failure very differently from people in, say, their 50s.
Yeah. Yeah. You go to a bookstore, there's so many books that saying, literally the title is like, it's okay to fail, or, failure leads to success, and all these.
Peatix-san, our mutual friend, has just published a book on that exact subject.
And so that is changing, but it's got to, right? Things are so dismal on a macro level that many more startups need to come out and build new things.
Well, I think that is the beauty of sort of startup math, if you will, is that even if 99% of the startups end in failure, that's enough.
Yeah.
That 1%, that's enough to kind of get Japan back on the right track again.
Absolutely. Even today, right? There's some big news with KDDI acquiring all these startups.
Yeah, that was surprising.
Yeah, and that's great, I think,
Well, there are a lot more. There's a lot more M&A activity than there ever has been in Japan.
And the IPO market doesn't seem to be too bad either.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's a little bubbly right now, but I think it's a great trend. I mean, it certainly gives me hope.
Well, I think it's. I mean, I agree with you. Bubbly in terms of valuations are high.
Sure.
But I think, and after the 2000 crash, the startup ecosystem just it disappeared. It was wiped out entirely. My sense now is that if we see another crash, when we see another crash,
sure.
I think the ecosystem that's built up over the last 10 years will survive that.
At the same time, there are several startups that I know of in Japan who really look at the big Silicon Valley startups, and they say it's okay to burn $700,000 or $800,000 a month, or $2 million a month even.
Well, yeah,
and
there are certainly some startups that won't survive it.
Right, and those might not make it, but for the most part, I think Japanese startups tend to be a little more conservative in their approach, a little more patient. And that includes us. We're very patient. That's got to be, I don't know the 2000. I was, 24, 25 years old. So
okay.
I have to believe that that's a little different, probably.
To me, it really does feel different. The investments are much smaller. They're more distributed among larger numbers of companies. There's more people making them.
Yeah.
There's more viable companies coming out of it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nonsense too, but believe me, you should have seen some of the stuff going on in 2000. It was
it was really stupid back in 2000, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, but that's I got to say, this is a thing that the Japanese often don't understand about Silicon Valley. Most of the startups there are pretty stupid too.
Yeah. Yeah.
We, over here, we only see the ones that make it.
Absolutely, right? I mean, it's the same in New York. A lot of startups that I meet, it's like, oh, what? You're trying to sell dog food to cats? It's just really...
Good luck with that. Keep in touch. Let me know how it goes.
Yeah, there's that.
Well, it's a good thing the math works out that 99% can still fail.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, well, listen, this has been great. Is there anything you want to talk about? I've been kind of driving this whole discussion. So
no, these are great questions. You have another question?
Oh, I can give you. Oh, believe me, I've got a bunch of sort of these random think questions that are okay. I'll just toss one at you. So, what was a decision you agonized over, and it turned out you made the wrong decision?
I don't know the answer to that yet. There might be
a number of candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some product decisions.
Okay.
Along the way, hiring decisions. Obviously, I won't.
No. But yeah, those. I think we all have a couple of horror stories in that department.
Yeah, we're very lucky. We made huge mistakes and a string of small to mid-sized mistakes along the way, but we're still here.
Well, I think it's best to make the mistakes early, right?
Yeah, and
the longer you wait, the sooner you make them, the cheaper they are.
It's really true. Dave McClure and everybody says this, but you need to continue to make mistakes. It's so true. We have many, many competitors in this field, and what I always tell the team is that whenever we make a mistake, guys, it's good that we made the mistake today and we've learned from it, because our other competitors they're going to run into it, but they're going to run into it a year later. And we would
cost them 3 times
exactly,
as much.
And we would have moved on. The mistakes that we run into, the mistakes that we make today, they probably experienced it 5 years ago.
That's a really interesting way of thinking of it. Most people think of valuable intellectual property as being the wonderful features and patents, but there's real value in the mistakes you made
you
too.
Learn so much more from what doesn't go well.
Yeah,
it's really true. I don't every textbook says this, I'm sure, but it really holds true for us. You learn so much, and and you become better in the end. As long as the mistake is manageable, right?
Well, yeah.
As long as
there's a limit to it.
So I like to think that as a startup, it's the experience of making mistakes every day.
That's awesome. Hey, well, listen, thanks for coming in and talking to us.
Thanks, Tim.
I really appreciate it.
It was a huge pleasure. Thank you.
Excellent.
And we're back. I hope you enjoyed that one. I think Taku's had some amazing points about the importance of focusing on the similarities rather than differences. And that's not only in terms of market entry and globalization, but I think that's just good advice to living your life in general. It helps keep the stress and negativity down. I also thought he had an amazing point about how our mistakes, both personal and corporate, sometimes turn out to be our most valuable intellectual property. If you want to get in touch with Taku or see any of the links we discussed on the show, go to disruptingjapan.com and all the resources will be in the show notes. And if you want to get in touch with us and have any ideas about how we can improve the show or people you think we should be talking to, send us an email at feedback@disruptingjapan.com. So until next time, this has been Tim Romero, and thanks for listening to Disrupting Japan.